So chapter 8 is claims about a mean. Chapter 9 is when you have two groups. And then chapter 10 is linear correlation. So the first thing to do with each problem is decide which chapter is it from. So linear correlation, that's chapter 10. And so you need to type the data, excuse me while I scroll, type the data into two lists, preferably list 1 and list 2. So these are going to stand for the x's and these are going to stand for the y's. So I'm not going to do the actual work for you, but go ahead and type those into the lists, list 1 and list 2. And then you would, on the calculator, go to stat, calculate, and number 5, the linear regression. So when you do, it will give you what R equals, and that's the test statistic. And then instead of drawing the bell-shaped curve, you draw that R lands between -1 and +1. And then you go to table A6 and look up the critical values. It'll be positive point something on the right, negative point that same number on the left. And then if the R lands over here, there's a positive linear correlation. If R lands over here, there's a negative linear correlation. Now, when you did that part with the calculator and it gave you R, it's also going to tell you y equals ax plus b. And then that's what this is about. So use that equation to predict the amount of hours if they're taking 12 units. The first thing to decide is this saying that x equals 12 or is it saying y equals 12? So if you go back to the list of data, the units are actually the y values. So that means unit stands for y. So this is saying y equals 12. So then you would substitute 12 right here, and then using the actual numbers for a and b, of course, you then do the algebra to solve for x. Then for number 3, test a claim. So this is chapter 8. So you would need to write down the claim. And the word at least means bigger than or equal to. And then you write down the h sub 1 and the h sub o. You would also need to go to that list, which is list 1, and find out what does n equal, what does x bar equal, and what's the s, the standard deviation. Then draw the t distribution. It turns out this one would be a left-tailed test. Since it doesn't say what to use for level of confidence, use 0.95 as a default. And then use table A3 to look up the critical value. After that, you could use the t-test for the test statistic. And then at the end, write the conclusion. All right, moving on to number 4. So this one is also chapter 8, test the claim. And then the claim is this number right here. So half means 0.5. So the claim is actually about a proportion that the p is equal to 0.5. And then you'd write down h1 and h sub o. And then next, since it's proportion, you just need two numbers. What's the sample size, n, which actually you would have right here from the previous problem. And then you need x, the number of successes. And it's going to be counted as a success if they take at least 12 units. So then you just scroll over to the list, and if they're taking at least 12 units. So you could just count at least 12, and you just go ahead and count how many people said they're taking at least 12 units. Whatever that x is, that's what you put right here. And then p hat would be when you divide x divided by n. And then you draw the bell-shaped curve whenever it's about proportions, you use A2 for the critical values. This one is going to have 2 critical values. After you use table A2 to look those up, then you can use the 1 proportion z-test to get the test statistic. And then you just show where that lands in the picture and then write the conclusion. Now for something that we're going to be doing for the rest of the semester, and that is dividing the data into groups. So this one is at most, which means less than or equal to 20 hours of work, and those with over 20 hours of work. So less than or equal to 20 hours. Well, with this one, I actually put them in numerical order, so it's pretty easy to see who is less than or equal to 20. So that would be these people, all of these people. So in the future, they're not always going to be in order, so you'll have to just pick through and see which ones are less than or equal to 20. Okay, those are the ones that are less than or equal to 20. Now back to the question. Scroll, scroll, stop. Then the important thing is the actual question is about how many units they're taking. So now go back to the list. And the question is about how many units they're taking, so that is this data right here. So you take that data and you put it in a new list. You could reuse list 1 or you could use list 3, but you need a new list. And then for those people over here, let me get another color, these people, you take their units and put it in a different list. All right, after you've done that, find the mean and standard deviation. So here's going to be the people that have less than or equal to 20 hours of work, and these are people that have over 20 hours of work. And then from those two lists, you would find out what's the sample size, what's the mean, and what's the standard deviation. For list number 2, what's the sample size, what's the mean, and what's the standard deviation. Then you would write down the claim, which is that it's the same for the two groups. So mean 1 equals mean 2. Write down H sub 1, write down H sub O, and then draw the beautiful bell-shaped curve. Since it's equals, that means there's going to be 2 tails. And then, because it's about the mean, you use table A3. And for table A3, you need to know degrees of freedom. So you just look at these 2 little n's, and whichever one is the smaller, you do n minus 1 for the smaller one. Then from table A3, you would have the critical values. And then you could do the 2 sample t-test. And then that would give you the test statistic. And like with the other ones, you show where it falls in the picture, and based on that, write a conclusion. So since this is part B, we're using the same 2 groups. So you would still use, so you would just copy and paste this information. So copy and paste. Oh well, doesn't matter. I don't need to do it. So anyway, copy and paste that red information and then put that over here. And then below the N1 and below the N2, you would then say what is X1 and what is X2. And the X's, you go and count. Again, you count how many people have at least 12 units. So again, it has to be the 2 groups. So these over here that are circled in red, you would count how many have at least 12, so that means 12 or more. And then for these people that are circled in blue, you would then see how many of them have 12 or more units. Once you have those numbers, you can put them here. Then you could write down the p hat for each one. So x1 divided by n1. P hat number 2, x2 divided by n2. And then for the claim, it's saying that the two groups have the same proportion. So that would be P1 equals P2. And then write down H sub O. Oh, excuse me, I usually do the other order. Write down H sub 1. Write down H sub O. And one more time, the bell-shaped curve. Whenever it's about proportions, you use table A2 to find the two critical values. And then for the test statistic, you can use the 2 proportion z-test. Again, show where that lands in the picture, and then write your conclusion. And then finally, a general conclusion. What does this say about work and the number of units? I think the one that addresses that the best is this one right here, part A. So I think your conclusion would be based on that. Have a good time. Talk to you soon.